have a great show planned for you today. I mean, great in the thoughts that, we love to share information. The information that we share isn't always great, though.
Yeah.
So we have a guest. His name is Nick Hulscher, and he's an epidemiologist. That's easy for you to say. And is working with Dr. Peter McCullough's foundation regarding the things that have been going on since the pandemic. And so he has kind of put a spotlight on the mRNA vaccines in chickens. But then later in this show, we are also going to visit with the Killdeer Rodeo Roundup, I believe. I always get that name confused. But the Killdeer Rodeo team and what's coming up over the 4th of July. But let's just get straight to the facts here. Let's welcome Nick Hulscher to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Nick. I saw some stories that you had been talking about lately regarding the mRNA vaccines, and we've covered them quite extensively right here on our show. And there's always been this fear that they're trying to put them in cattle and try to put it in our feed supply, and not only that, but even in lettuce out in California and whatnot. So there's all kinds of things going on, but you actually have been kind of following the chicken story now. They're trying to put the mRNA vaccine in chickens?
Well, honestly, what appears to be the case is, so they are working on mRNA vaccines for chickens and for cattle, but what appears to be happening is they may actually pick a protein-based vaccine by the company Zoetis. They conditionally approved this vaccine already in February, and so it's actually ready for rollout into chickens already. So it's not mRNA, but still, it still is antigen-based, so it still has these toxic proteins. And so what they would be doing is injecting all of our food supply, all these chickens, with this Zoetis injection. And not only does that risk contaminating the food supply and the consumers obviously ingesting the vaccine components, but it will risk mutations of the virus, because as H5N1 circulates among these chickens, and then they introduce what's called a leaky vaccine, or a vaccine that doesn't protect them fully, it can introduce what's called immune escape mutations and cause lethal strains, more infectious strains, and make the jump to humans. So this would be an absolute disaster, not only for humans, but for the chickens as well. And this should not go ahead. And they are currently planning it. It is in the planning stage. They are sorting it out with trade producers because nobody wants vaccinated poultry, so they're trying to sort those fears out. But this plan should not even be on the table.
This is scary to me. Help us and our viewers understand, but this almost feels like a plan, because you're saying that this will cause mutations, which will then essentially be much easier for humans to become contaminated and to be sick and maybe even have a pandemic type of a situation. So can you break that down a little bit more? Does it seem like a planned thing to you?
Well, knowing what happened with COVID-19 and the pre-planning that went into that with Event 201, et cetera, it appears that there is possibly, a coordinated plan in order to do this. Unfortunately, because we know based on the past peer-reviewed literature, 2 studies that do indicate that indeed, and they confirmed it without a doubt, that when you introduce a leaky vaccine during an avian influenza outbreak in poultry, it does lead to the acceleration of these mutations. That was a study by Lee and colleagues published a few months ago. And then there's also a study by Reed and colleagues that found this is what happened with Marek's disease. It made it super transmissible and lethal as a result of introducing these vaccinations to the animals. And so we know without a doubt that it will be a disaster. And so we remain unsure as why they're going ahead with it. Clearly, there seems to be other motives and focus.
Sure. Now, I know you had mentioned that they have a conditional license, but a conditional license allows the vaccine to be used immediately, but only under specific circumstances, such as during an outbreak or in targeted populations. As of June 2025, Zoetis' H5N2 vaccine remains the only avian influenza vaccine conditionally approved by the USDA for use in the U.S. poultry. No other vaccines are currently authorized or ready for large-scale deployment. So with that being said, that's almost like like the COVID vaccine, they used it without knowing what the side effects might be. Can you kind of talk to that?
Right, right. Yeah, with the COVID vaccines, they didn't know anything, right? It takes 5 to 15 years to know the full safety profile of a genetic therapy. So, yeah, they didn't know anything with that. But with these chicken vaccines, with Zoetis's, they have conditionally approved that vaccine with no efficacy data. They don't even know if it works. It's based on a reasonable assumption that it will work based on how many antibodies the chickens make. And so it's just ridiculous. So again, it's a complete unknown again that they're trying to introduce into millions upon millions of chickens. Again, this will likely gravely backfire and result in horrible consequences. This should not happen.
So why are they going to approve it? Or I guess the better question is, how can they get away with doing this? Is there any set recourse?
There's no recourse, particularly when it comes to animals. I mean, if they end up injecting it and it kills a bunch of chickens, causes mutations, nobody's going to be held accountable. Just like nobody's been held accountable for the mRNA injections and the mass harm and injury that those have caused. So we have to start introducing accountability to our public health authorities, so they can't just make these decisions with free range and no worry of the consequences.
Well, and it seems like that's the road we've been going down. They've gotten away with it for so long that they continue to do it. And by vaccinating our livestock, our protein that we consume, what are the ramifications? Do we then also have that protein in our body? How does that work?
It's possible. We would have to test it to know for sure what the answer would be. So basically what will happen is, so these chickens will be inoculated with these antigens or with this inactivated virus, inactivated H5N2 virus, which, by the way, is mismatched. It's not even H5N1, so that creates more problems. And so then you may be consuming these inactivated viruses that were injected into this chicken. Now, a lot of it will probably degrade with cooking, but we have no clue. Many of the virons may survive, right? Many of these antigens may still be there after the cooking process. We just have absolutely no clue. And unfortunately, knowing what our public health agencies have done in the past, they're not going to test that. They won't care. They'll just inoculate it. There's no labeling requirements, so you won't know if you're eating a vaccinated chicken or not. Just all around, there hasn't been much transparency at all regarding animal vaccinations.
Sure, and that doesn't even include when you're prepping that food, whether or not you can get that onto your hands. Not everybody wears gloves when they're working with chicken, etc. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to dig a little bit deeper on this. Don't go away. Welcome back to Ladies of Another View on Beck. We've been visiting with Nick Hulscher. He is with the Dr. Peter McCullough Foundation, and he's just a wealth of information. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So just a little bit about yourself then, Nick. You're a Master of Public Health, and you're an administrator at McCullough Foundation. Tell us a little bit about Nick and about your background, and what is a Master of Public Health?
Yeah, well, a master's in public health in epidemiology is basically the study of disease. What causes it? What can help it? What can prevent it? So basically, I like to call an epidemiologist a disease investigator. That's the best way to put it. So what's happened is, so I went to University of Michigan for my epidemiology training, and I actually was able to get into contact with Dr. Peter McCullough during an internship. So while I was there at University of Michigan. And from then on, with the McCullough Foundation, we have actually published over 20 scientific studies now in the peer-reviewed literature exposing the harms of the COVID-19 mRNA injections and the possible laboratory origins of H5N1 bird flu. But we don't just do studies at the McCullough Foundation, right? We do many other things. We have 4 pillars, including justice, public health policy, investigative scholarship, and public and physician education. So we do put out short documentaries, we do put out original content, original news, each and every day. And so we do a lot of things operationally at the McCullough Foundation. But right now, our primary goal with research is to show all the harms ongoing with the mRNA injection campaign. And in the future, we will be looking at the link between COVID or between childhood vaccination and autism and neurodevelopmental disorders.
Wow, what a wonderful thing to be involved with. We thank you so much for all of the work that you and the foundation have been doing. Tell us a little bit about what that was like for you going through COVID, your experiences when you were in school. How did this all come about for you?
Well, I'll tell you, during school, many of my professors were quite upset, right? They weren't very happy that during the poster session, I was actually presenting what I was doing with Dr. McCullough, which was our very first paper, a systematic review of autopsy findings in deaths after COVID vaccination, where we collected 325 autopsies that were published already in the peer-reviewed literature, and we adjudicated all of them to see were they linked to the vaccine. And 73.9% of them were linked to the vaccine. And so I showed this to all my colleagues, all my professors, all my friends, other students, and people were shocked. And since then, I feel like there was a large portion of people that looked down upon me and thought I was what they claim is an anti-vaxxer. I'm just concerned that a product is on the market that's causing, large numbers of deaths, right? I don't know why, that's anti-vax. That's just being worried, about people's health. But yeah, a lot of backlash. Many of these universities, unfortunately, are still spewing out propaganda.
But even with epidemiology, that's what you're studying. You would think that it would have the best of the best minds knowing what's going on. So to me, it's almost a little bit backward.
Right. You would think, yeah, you as a disease investigator, right? You want to know, what disease are these mRNA shots causing, And so it is. It really is surprising to me that it's so hard to accept. And one reason is likely a psychological defense mechanism. When you receive upwards of 5 to 6 of these boosters, it's going to be very hard to come to terms with the fact that it has been a disastrous mistake for the health.
Absolutely, but I think even at the very get-go, it just goes to show the power of suggestion and, the way that we've been kind of primed and pumped through our culture, through big pharma, through all kinds of different pressures to cause people to think and act in a certain way where they're looking at hard facts and data that is obviously the proof, that is the science. And these great minds are unable to accept and or process this and come to terms with reality. It's just absolutely mind-boggling.
It truly is. It truly is. And, we are seeing some change in the general population, right? Over 80% of people are refusing to take the mRNA shots at this point in time. Over 85% of healthcare workers are refusing them. So, people understand that they're dangerous, but there is still a small subset of people that can't let go.
Okay, so why don't you explain why the mRNA vaccines are different than other vaccines?
Yeah, so conventional vaccines are either just like a single antigen, right, a single protein, say like the spike protein on the surface of the virus, or inactivated virus vaccines, right, where it's the whole virus, but they've kind of inactivated it so it can't replicate in the body. So those are conventional vaccines. mRNA vaccines, or I like to call them injections, I don't really think they're vaccines. They don't meet the definition. They actually meet the definition of genetic therapy, gene therapy, because what they do is, so mRNA is put into lipid nanoparticles, which are like little bubbles. And so they inject it in your arm, but it doesn't stay in the arm. It goes throughout the entire body. We now know, based on hundreds of studies at this point, that it reaches the brain, the heart, the reproductive system, the bone marrow. So we know it goes into every single organ system. And once it's in there, this mRNA goes into your cells and actually tells your cells, instructs your cells to produce a toxic non-human protein, which is the spike protein, now shown to be highly pathogenic in over 300 different studies. And so that's how these mRNA shots work. Clearly not the same as conventional ones.
Wow. It's terrifying.
Right, but when you say pathogenic, does that mean cancerous? Help me there a little bit.
Pathogenic means basically it's bad for you, right? It just means it's going to cause damage. It's going to cause tissue damage. Your body doesn't like it, and it's toxic, and so it harms your body. But when you said carcinogenic, the spike protein that the injections instruct your body to produce is a carcinogen. We can say that at this point in time. Again, there's now over 100 studies showing that mRNA injections may cause cancer via 7 different mechanisms. So this is another avenue that is now just kind of coming out of the pipeline, and more studies are coming out now every week showing the carcinogenic potential of these shots.
And so that is exactly why when anything new is developed, there's usually a study. They don't usually just force people to start taking it. By the millions and millions of people taking it, there is usually a controlled study, and this is exactly why.
This is exactly why.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll visit with Nick a little bit further. Don't go away. Welcome back to Ladies of Another View on Beck. We've been visiting with Nick Hulscher. He is an epidemiologist, and he's with the McCullough Foundation. He's an administrator there. Welcome back to this show, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
You know, it's great to hear the information from you because you guys are firsthand. You guys are at the top of the food chain when it comes to distributing this information, and we appreciate that so much. Dr. Peter McCullough is just absolutely on fire and has been from the beginning of the pandemic. But there's so many different viruses and strains and this and that going on. I was listening to a show that you were on before regarding a storage unit out in California that they found that they had all kinds of different pathogens. Why don't you talk about that?
Yes. So in California, I believe it's called the Reedley Biolab. What they found was actually there was CCP-linked researchers basically in like a back alley. I mean, like basically in some shack. I mean, not literally, but basically. And what they had was like hundreds of different pathogens just laying out. They had SARS-CoV-2. They had a freezer labeled Ebola. They had all sorts of different pathogens just laying around. And this was shut down, thankfully, and found out and quickly cleared out and cleaned out. And there was a whole report on this by our government. They looked deeply into it. But that's just one example of what can happen in America. There's so many biolabs that we may not be aware of, where foreign adversaries or even domestic adversaries are, holding these toxic and dangerous pathogens.
And it's also very concerning because it's directly linked to the CCP, and we know what's happened in the past and the concerns that could go on in the future. It just sort of blows your mind to think about the possibilities there.
Right. And, this isn't the only situation with the CCP and biological materials. Recently, three CCP-linked researchers were detained by the FBI for being caught transporting agroterrorism fungus to the University of Michigan to work on it in our own university labs. And so this fungus can actually destroy crops, cause food shortages, and even is toxic to the human body. So they were transporting that, and they were also transporting roundworms. And why are they bringing roundworms in from China? They're trying to hide it in their luggage. They get caught, and now thankfully they are facing prosecution for smuggling illegal biological materials. But the most concerning thing is, this was linked to our own universities, to University of Michigan. How many other universities are involved in these operations?
Well, and that's the scary part, because even our University of North Dakota trains Chinese pilots in their pilot program. And the Chinese are buying up land next to military bases. There's battery plants. In fact, the one in Michigan is called Goshen, that they're trying to chase out of town. And we do have an attorney out of Minneapolis, Robbie Doobie. He's been working hard and heavy chasing all these Chinese stories and businesses that are popping up all over the country, and it's like we need to take a stand against our foreign adversaries building any kind of business. You know, we can't go to China and buy land. So why do we allow them, excuse me, to come over here, buy land, set up businesses, and for nefarious reasons for that matter?
Right, right. This should not be allowed. This should not be allowed, particularly when they get caught with illegal biolabs, smuggling illegal materials, buying up all the farmland. You know, if we end up in a hot war for some reason against China, you know, trying to defend Taiwan or something, you know, they'll have all sorts of plans they can do with now their access to American lands. And so, yeah, very dangerous, should not be allowed.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that there's going to be some level of prosecution for these individuals who've been smuggling pathogens into our country. I mean, I'm glad for a small win, and hopefully it will be more than a slap on the wrist, because that's really where it's at, is we have to be proactive in, you know, punishing crime.
Right, we have to, because if there's never accountability, people are just going to repeat the same mistakes, the same criminal activities over and over and over and over again. And so that's why we're also concerned about another, you know, pandemic or pandemic. You know, they might repeat the exact same things they did with COVID, which would obviously be a disaster because no accountability has been served. And they're still doing gain of function. They're still modifying pathogens.
Yeah, that's crazy. But you know, the mainstream media doesn't cover the Chinese issues very much. Excuse me. And I know some will say that what was brought over from China is, it's called scab, is kind of the layman's term for it. And then of course the roundworms. Well, we do have scab in the country, and we do have roundworms. However, we don't know if this is another level. Is this another, you know, mutation of scab, which can hurt our wheat and our barley and our different crops and whatnot. So we don't know what's been mutated, because you have that gain of function too, and that's from animals to human or whatnot. But you don't know, they're trying to just see how much further they can push a certain virus or, you know, bacteria or whatnot.
Right, right. They brought these in specifically to manipulate in a laboratory. So we probably do expect that, you know, they were planning on changing the characteristics of these pathogens, maybe to make it more dangerous to crops, maybe to make it more dangerous to humans, for all we know. So again, great thing that they were caught.
All right, so we have about a minute left with you, Nick. What would you like to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, well, you know, base spike detoxification for people that are worried about mRNA-induced injury. You know, the mRNA does instruct the body to produce this toxic spike, which is now found to last years in the human body. This is 3 natural compounds: bromelain, curcumin, and nattokinase. 3 safe compounds that have shown promise in clearing the spike protein from the body. This was developed by Dr. Peter McCullough himself.
Right, and I know that he's been on the show promoting that as well, and I've actually purchased it, and I've tried it, and it's like I can't say that I feel any different, but I never took the vaccines. I never got the jab, so I'm just taking it more for precautionary. So Nick, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for sharing the information that you have, and we appreciate what you and Dr. Peter McCullough are up to, and we hope that you'll come on again and share information.
Thanks for having me, and I'd love to come back on your show.